There we go. British psychologist Adrian Raine, Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
So, is this our first guest with an actual Wikipedia page? Probably. I don't think.
The celebrity status.
Yeah, we're moving up in the world.
As I say, it wasn't me who had anything to do with that. So.
Okay. Someone's typed that up.
Yeah, but the saying goes, if a king needs to say that he's a king, is he really a king? Kind of.
Oh,
so, yeah.
It's a nice way of thinking about it.
Welcome to the Smooth Brain Society podcast. Have you ever come across something and thought, I'm not smart enough for this? We think the fault lies with those who present information in ways which are hard to understand. In an attempt to change this, we'll be speaking to researchers, experts, and all-round wrinkly-brained individuals, improving our understanding of a broad range of topics which are rooted in psychology. Join us as we try to develop ourselves one brain fold at a time.
Please note that the Smooth Brain Society podcast is distinct from the Herenga Waka Victoria University of Wellington. The views expressed on this show are those of our guests, presenters, and affiliates alone, and we assume no liability for the application of the information discussed. We also take no responsibility for any change in brain folds on part of the audience. Viewer discretion is advised. Now on to the podcast.
All right.
Cool. I can intro.
Go on.
Okay. I haven't introed before. It's usually Sahir. So, all right, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Olivia, and I'm with Sahir.
Hello.
Our guest today is Dr. Adrian Raine, a criminal psychologist specializing in the study of biological correlates of criminal behaviour. He received his bachelor's degree from Oxford University and subsequently his PhD at the University of York. Currently, Dr. Raine is a professor and Richard Perry Professor of Criminology, Psychiatry and Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. He was the first scientist to use neuroimaging to study the brains of murderers in 1997, a classic study which is often included in a test question in introductory psychology courses. He has a total of over 52,000 citations from 375 journal articles. You have to tell me if that's correct. He's published 7 books, presented in 26 countries, written for and appeared on television, and is one of the founders and pioneers of neurocriminology. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what brings you to this part of the world, or Wellington?
Oh, it was a sort of an award from the Royal Society in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
And the nature of the award is for me to come over here and really talk about the work I do with the idea that it may get picked up or promulgated a little bit more in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be here working with my colleague Hedwig Eisenbarth in the psychology department here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be coming over for 1 month a year for the next 3 years. Again, to try and just stimulate a research discussion on the type of work I do and the sort of, the approach that I take to crime and violence.
Yeah, because it's quite an interesting approach. So sort of a biological view of criminality. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, yes. I mean, we've known for many decades that there's a social basis to crime and violence. I mean, historically, we've always, viewed crime as a product of poverty, unemployment, poor housing, the macro social, big picture social variables that can push some people into crime and violence.
Mm-hmm.
But social factors are only one side of the coin. There's also biological factors too, and genetic factors. So that side of the coin has really not been investigated. More recently it has been when I was starting my research, which was back in 1977 is when I started researching the biological basis of crime, violence, antisocial behavior. It really wasn't on anyone's radar screen. And so what I've been trying to do all of my career is try to flip the coin. Yes, the social factors are very important, no question, but we've learned that. But what have we ignored? And I would argue we've systematically ignored the biological part of the equation. And so that's what I've been doing in my career, just looking at that other side of the coin. Because if we can understand more of the factors that go to push somebody into a life of crime, then we'll be in a better position to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. Considering you're the first person we've had who has an actual Wikipedia page, I can scroll through and ask questions from there.
I have nothing to do with that Wikipedia page. I didn't make it.
Well, that makes it even better.
For the record.
Right? That makes it even better, doesn't it? But it says here, and Olivia mentioned as well, you were the first, you'd probably say one of the first then, to do neuroimaging in this regard. How does one come up with the idea of doing it that way?
Right. I got the idea because when I started my PhD, at that time there was no brain imaging. So I looked at other brain factors like EEG, the electroencephalogram. That's something that I could use. So that's how I started. But then when I got my first academic job, there was a brain imaging center right below me. So that got me interested in the idea of, if I think there's a brain basis to crime and violence, okay, so far I've only been able to use EEG. How about using brain imaging? So that's how the idea came about. And really, it was only when I got to California that I really had the opportunity to study murderers, because there's more murderers in Los Angeles than in England. And so it's easier in Los Angeles to round up 41 murderers, put them into a brain scanner and match them to 41 control individuals. And that's really how I started the brain imaging work I've been doing on crime and violence. But it really all stemmed from my very early work doing a PhD, well before brain imaging, and believing that there is a brain basis in part to the cause of crime. That was the beginning of me sort of beginning to get involved in brain imaging research. It really started from my very first job at Nottingham University in England.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious how people or the general public responds to that there seems to be a biological basis for crime.
Generally speaking, I think the public are interested. I know students are interested. I mean, I teach a sort of undergraduate class and at my university, and I get students from everywhere. I mean, you'd think that being in the Department of Psychology and Criminology, as well as Psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania, you would think, well, that's where the students would come from, psychology and criminology. And really not. They come from really all over. And in fact, the students who predominate in the class are actually doing a major in philosophy, politics, and economics. Mm-hmm. They are by far and away the largest group in my class. So I think broadly speaking, the work I do tends to be of interest. And when you talk about the public, I've given talks to the public and they've been really interested. In England, I made 3 documentaries for British TV on what makes a murderer. So I would get a murderer, a real-life murderer, who's finished their sentence. They're now out. And my job is to say, well, what made him do it? And so I work with a forensic psychologist in those programs. The forensic psychologist, Vicky, she would interview the person. And then based on that information, I develop hypotheses about what biological factors may be involved in that particular case. So if I thought, for example, could be hormones that could be involved, then we'd do an assay from the individual to get a testosterone. If I thought that they may have some sort of brain dysfunction, I might order a brain scan and do that and then examine their brain that way. Mm-hmm. And look to see, can I find any abnormality in the brain? Or it could be that cognitive functioning, neurocognitive functioning is poor. So I'd give them tests on that. Or I may take their DNA. I may take a blood sample because I suspect it might be genetics based on their case. So, to the extent that, British TV want to hear this for the public, it's not a sign. Yeah, it's it's like an evening show for the public. Then, I think that the public are sort of interested in it because it's a bit different to what they normally hear.
Well, the public is really interested in such things, documentaries about murderers and things like that anyway. You see
they
Netflix,
are, true crime.
True crime documentaries.
Yeah, I mean, what you tend to find in true crime is, it's a bit of a whodunit type of thing and sort of trying to sometimes work out, are they really innocent? Are they really guilty? Often you never really get to grips with, well, what caused them to do it? Beyond, financial incentives, financial motives, things like that. So I think it goes, it builds on exactly what you've just said, and it goes a little bit further, perhaps, for people.
Yeah, more of a why done it as opposed to who done it.
Yeah. Why did they do it?
So could you tell me, first, could you tell me what the name of your documentary series is or was?
What Makes a Murderer?
It sounds very similar to Making a Murderer, which was the...
Sounds like New Zealand.
That was a true crime documentary, wasn't it? About the person who was in prison for an offence and then they were released, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe they committed another offence.
Yeah. So What Makes a Murderer? Can we get it online, or is it just British cable TV?
No, there are links to it. I'm not sure if in New Zealand the links work, but I could always send you the links.
That would be great. Otherwise, we'll be illegally streaming them. Okay, you touched upon various potential things which you do in the show. Like there could be a cognitive reason for it. It could be genetic. It could be hormonal. What kind of trends have you found in your research with, if we say, cognitive per se? What brain regions are we talking about generally?
Well, yeah, I mean, first and foremost, the prefrontal cortex, which is the very front part of the brain. It lies above your eyes and just behind your forehead. And it's the most recently developed part of the brain in evolutionary terms. And that was really our key finding from that first brain imaging study of murderers, that the key finding from that study is that murderers as a group have poor functioning in the frontal region of the brain. You're asking sort of why? Well, the prefrontal cortex is involved in two important things with respect to crime. One is emotion regulation, regulating our emotions. It's involved in impulse control, so checking on our behavior before we actually act. And in a way, we all get angry at times, don't we? But what stops us lashing out? We have a good frontal cortex that tells us, no, don't act now, step back, count to 10, take time out. This isn't the right place, the right time. It's a bit like the guardian angel on behavior, in a way. But if the guardian angel is asleep, as it is in some murderers, well, the devil can come out. People can get killed.
Yep. And any other areas as well, or is it mostly that prefrontal cortex?
That's the one key area that's been well replicated for sure. But no, there are other parts of the brain that we find to be abnormal in offenders. So let's take a group you've probably heard of, psychopaths. These are people who commit crime, but they have no conscience, no remorse, no guilt. They're stony cold. We believe they don't experience emotions in the same way that we do, so that, we wouldn't want to hurt someone because we could say, oh, well, I wouldn't want to be hurt. I wouldn't want a knife stuck in me. That would hurt, We could empathize with a potential victim. But we think psychopaths don't have those feelings for other people. They lack empathy. And one part of the brain that's very much involved in emotion is called the amygdala. It's deep inside the brain. And we took a group of psychopaths and brain scanned them, and we found, it was about an 18% volume reduction in the size of the amygdala. So their emotion center of the brain is literally shrunken in size physically, so that psychopaths are physically different to the rest of us. So that's structure. And in function, they are different too. So what we would do is we would give individuals who range in the degree of psychopathy from high to low, because psychopathy is actually a dimension, shades of grey. And so we had a group of people who varied in their degree of psychopathy, and we would put them in a brain scanner and give them moral dilemmas. What's that? Well, an example which you may have heard about before is the trolley dilemma. And if you've not heard about it, think of it this way.
It's a philosophy dilemma, eh?
Well, this is why I get philosophy, politics, and economics students in my class.
Yeah.
Because we do go into philosophical issues too, and even political issues. So you imagine that you're standing on a footbridge and right next to you is a large gentleman. A runaway train is going to kill 5 railway workers. The train will pass underneath the bridge. You can, however, push the big man off the bridge. He falls down and he stops the train. He dies, but you save the 5 lives of the railway workers who would have been killed by that runaway train. And the question is, what do you do? So why don't you think about that right now? Don't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
You'll push him off, right?
Most likely.
I was going to say no.
Well, he's a big guy, and he's probably going to die early of heart disease anyway because he's big, he's obese.
Yeah.
So give his life some meaning, push him off. Come on.
Give his life some meaning.
Do the numbers. You can do arithmetic, can't you? It's 5 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
Utilitarian moral decision making.
Mm.
You should push him off the bridge, right?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking more on the lines of, because I know that the train's going to hit 5 people. In my head, I've either killed 5 or I've killed 1, and I'd rather kill 1 than 5.
So so you're sort of less guilty in a way. I mean, for us, we're less interested in actually what people say that they would do. And indeed, about 85% of people would not push the big man off the bridge, even though they could save 5 lives. What we are interested in is how you feel when you think about that dilemma, being there, up close and personal. Because most of us feel awkward. Most of us feel uncomfortable. And the amygdala, the emotional amygdala, is firing away, giving us that feeling of it's morally wrong to push this person off the bridge, even though the numbers say I should do it. But what we find with people who vary in their degree of psychopathy is that psychopathic people have significantly reduced functioning of the amygdala when they are contemplating dilemmas like that. So that can explain, in addition to the structural abnormality, why psychopaths are so immoral, why they do such horrific things. But for me, it raises a moral question for all of us because, we think that the amygdala is the emotional engine that drives moral behavior. But if that engine is burnt out, as it is in psychopaths, for reasons beyond their control, then how moral is it of us to punish psychopaths as harshly as we do? Because, they don't ask to be born with an amygdala that's, 3 sizes too small.
Mm-hmm. I think I heard you say in an interview, some people have less free will than others.
Yeah, I mean, 2 ways you can go. You could say, like I would, there's really no free will in life. We think there is, but there isn't. Or you could say, well, there is free will. But even if you believe in free will, wouldn't you also recognize that there are degrees of freedom of will, that for some people early in life, the die is a cast, that, they have the predispositions and risk factors that are going to lead them into a criminal way of life. And I suppose, for me thinking about that, when I was even a graduate student doing my research, if you were to ask me, do you believe in free will? I'd say yes. And I'd say yes because I would say, well, look, I can make a decision. So I make a decision. I can walk out of this studio right now. I've got the will to do that. I have the choice. And I could if I wanted to. And that would make me believe I've got free will. But actually, it's not me making the decision. It's my brain. And the brain is programmed by genes, environment, circumstances, life experiences, and chance factors. It's a computer that ultimately makes that decision for us. So for me, although this gets to be a bit philosophical, I believe that people are not really fully responsible for their behavior. And certainly not psychopaths and other murderers with significant brain dysfunction, especially when it's combined with social dysfunction like child abuse and poverty and, being brought up with the wrong people, the wrong role models in life. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you should say no, and you should contest me. You should fight a bit more.
The problem with that is I study genetics, therefore
so you're a believer.
I'm a lot more on that side. But it does raise the important question of then what do you do? As you said,
what do you do?
Psychopaths are punished pretty harshly for, as you said, for something which they don't have much free will over or any free will over. So then what do you do about it?
What we do is we protect society. We can't let these people run around, killing people or hurting us. So we have to institutionalize them. But I think the question is, under what conditions? So, for example, if you are serving life in prison without the possibility of parole, in the United States, that's certainly true, then you can't reproduce. You can't send your sperm out, or women can't receive sperm. You can't have children. Now, I think that's sort of passive eugenics.
Interesting.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Not allowing people to reproduce. And I always thought that eugenics was a bad thing. But we do that. They don't have the right to vote. So all the liberties and freedoms are taken away from them, in addition to protecting society. So I would say more that we need to protect society, but instead of taking away these freedoms and liberties, in most states in the United States, that's true. California is an exception. You can have conjugal visits there. But instead, we need to focus a lot more on rehabilitation. Instead, we're focusing on retribution, punishment, because we're angry and upset about what these people have done, which, on another perspective is very understandable. Because if you've been a victim of crime, you don't want to hear any sob stories about what caused the person into a life of crime and to do what they did. You just want, payback, retribution.
Yeah. Interesting. Because I think a lot of people would argue, it's one thing to do these sorts of crime, but then, to take someone else's life is like, that seems like a calculated choice.
Calculated choice. Although what we would argue especially is that poor functioning in the prefrontal cortex especially predisposes to impulsive violence. And indeed, with our murderers, although the key finding was poor frontal lobe functioning, poor impulse control, we divided the murderers up into two groups. One group planned and regulated their murders. And the other group, it was more impulsive and unplanned. And it was the group who were impulsive and had a lot of emotion, and they, sort of snapped. Those are the ones where we really find prefrontal dysfunction. Other murderers, it's different. One of our murderers was a serial killer who killed 64 people in a 12-year period, almost without being caught. Randy Kraft. And his brain scan, he had good frontal lobe function.
Really?
Yep. And so he was very different. He's the exception, proves the... Well, I think he's the exception that proves the rule. He's very different to the one-off impulsive murderers. But here's a man who could carefully plan and regulate his behavior. He would take guys out. He'd get them drunk. He'd put drugs in their drink. He'd have sex with them, kill them, clean up the mess, and then get into work next day as a computer consultant. And to do that for 12 years, almost without being caught, killing 64 people. You have to have something good going for you. And what Randy had good going for him is a frontal cortex, which would allow him to plan, regulate, and control his behavior very carefully. That doesn't explain what makes a serial killer, because we may have good frontal lobe function. We don't go and become a serial killer. I'm not trying to explain or understand what makes a serial killer, no matter how fascinating that question is. It's very difficult to answer. But what I would say is that I think quite a number of murders and indeed crimes are not thought out, and they are impulsive. Of course, somebody always makes a decision, even though it's in the moment, even though it's impulsive. Of course, people make a decision whether to pull the trigger, to stick the knife in someone. No question about that. But what we have to look at are what are the factors that led that person to do it and not this person. They differ. They differ in terms of their social environment, their family upbringing, and their genes and brain functioning. And so I think we've got to put these pieces together in order to better explain and understand what led this person to do such a terrible thing. Because unless we do that, we're just going to live out the headlines in the newspaper that we have today in the future. More rape, more crime, more child abuse. We'll never really get to grips with the true culprits, the true villains, which I believe, or half of them at least, half of the villains, I think lie within the brain and in our genes.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about looking at this kind of stuff really early to see who might be predisposed.
Indeed, yes. Yeah. And indeed, a lot of my work has been studying children and following them up over time to see which ones grow up to become antisocial. So let's see, and for 34 years now, I've been working on an island called Mauritius, which is a small tropical island in the Indian Ocean.
Beautiful place.
You've been, have you?
No, I've got friends from there. So.
Oh, right. Yeah. We started studying children when they were age 3, and we've been following them up over time. And there we go. So, the problem with brain imaging, you can brain scan a psychopath and say, oh, they've got a dysfunctional brain. Question is, it's a chicken and egg question. What came first? Does the brain dysfunction cause the crime? Or does living a criminal way of life change your brain in a way to change its structure and function? Because for sure, the social environment does change the brain. We know that. So in Mauritius, what we were able to do, amygdala, remember that structure, which is the center of emotion? Although we didn't have brain imaging, we could take a measure called classical conditioning, fear conditioning. We're measuring basically sweat rate in those 3-year-old children when something negative is about to happen. Now, negative, what can you do negative to a 3-year-old? Not a lot, but on a pair of headphones, you can play a really loud, aversive sound, which they don't like. And so what we're doing, we play that, we present a tone before the aversive sound comes on. And then after a period of time, if your fear conditioning is up to snuff, if it's good, then even when the warning tone comes on, even that little 3-year-old child will learn, oh, something bad is about to happen. They'll begin to experience what we call anticipatory fear. They'll become anxious. We can measure that because then those children show a bigger sweat response. We're measuring that from the fingers with electrodes. So this is giving us, fear conditioning is giving us a handle on amygdala functioning. And what we find is that the 3-year-old kids with poor amygdala functioning, as indicated by poor fear conditioning, they are more likely to grow up to become criminal offenders at age 23, because we followed them up for 20 years, found out which ones became criminal offenders. And so the ones with the poor amygdala functioning, giving them the lack of anticipatory fear, that seems to be one of the factors that's involved. But when we published that study, the journal ran an editorial on the paper, which is the journal gets another scientist to critique the paper. And so the scientists came in, and the title of their critique was Born to be Criminal. Mm-hmm. What do we make of this? So this was a scientist called Philippe Sturzer, and he said, look, we've got to be really careful, because if we identify biological markers for future crime early on, well, that information could be misused. We could label innocent 3-year-old children as future criminal offenders, and that would be wrong. And I think we'd all agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But Sturzer goes on to say, but we're getting new insights about the causes of crime. And the last sentence of his critique says, so we should use this knowledge to create new interventions to give those children at greatest need the help they need to break them out of a life of crime.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the key question is, do we do that? Do we really do that? Screen and intervene early on in life, find out those who have the mark of Cain, the biological markers for later crime, and then putting them into interventions to change their biology, to change their behavior. And I think you can look at that two ways. One way is to say, that's a slippery slope to, eugenics almost in a way, changing somebody's essence, their biology, and early on in life too. But it gets difficult because, you see, I think in the future, we're going to have guilty knowledge. We're going to have more knowledge about the causes of crime. We're going to be collecting more data on people, and we're going to put together social data, medical data, psychological data, and potentially biological data too, into data sets. And with techniques like machine learning and other advanced statistical techniques, I believe we'll do a better job of predicting who amongst us is a danger to society. I think that time will come. I think the prediction will never be perfect, but it will get better. And I think a tipping point may eventually come, which will be, we can do one of two things with the information. We can do nothing at all, or we can act. So it's, a bit like this. You've got this, you're a mother of this 10-year-old boy, let's call him Johnny, and in the future. And with this new scenario that may well exist, I come to you and I say, little Johnny's rotten. He's a bad egg. We've run all our tests on him. We've put together all the data, and all the boxes are checked. Every single box is checked for him to grow up to become a violent criminal offender. Indeed, we've worked out there's a 70% chance that your little Johnny will become the violent criminal offender of the future. That's the bad news. The good news is this, that we've developed new intervention and prevention programs which take social, psychological, and biological interventions put together in a new way to reduce Johnny's chance of becoming a violent criminal offender. The treatment is not perfect, but there's a 70% chance of success. One snag is you are part of little Johnny's problems. You're a bad mother. And bad parenting is well known to be a key risk factor for later crime. So we have to take little Johnny away from you for 2 years. It's, institutionalized treatment. Question for you as a mother, what would you do?
Oh, I don't think I'd like that.
No, you wouldn't. So you'd keep little Johnny and you're running a 70% chance of ruining the lives of innocent victims in the future that little Johnny will take out as the violent offender. And little Johnny will ruin his life because he's going to go to prison. He's going to ruin your life and maybe the family life or your other children. So are you willing to take that risk?
Oh, I guess not. But then part of me would be kind of angry at the government if I wasn't supported in the proper way with adequate, food and housing.
Well, they're giving you the support now. It's the intervention program that's going to help your little Johnny.
Yeah.
So and it's difficult.
Yeah.
And I think there's no, again, it's a bit like the trolley dilemma. There's no right or wrong answer to this question. But I think we'll have to grapple with that. And as I say, I feel in the future we'll have guilty knowledge. Because you see, if we have the knowledge and if we don't act, we are guilty. We're guilty of not acting. You can take the moral high ground and you can say, oh, no, it's just wrong to intervene in people's lives. But we've got blood on our hands if we do that. The blood of the innocent victims that we could have saved if only we had acted.
Yeah. Is there a line that you can draw so people who are...
The line in the sand, where are we going to judiciously draw that line between sending little Johnny into the prevention program for 2 years or keeping him at home? I think we'll all have different views on this. I think we'll all draw lines in the sand. And all those lines will be different where we place the marker. But can't we get an average of all the lines that we'd individually draw to get a consensus on what we should ultimately do? But, this is an issue that some people would be violently against. And I think it's also an issue that some people really resonate to. They say, yes, we're not doing enough. We should spend more resources in trying to help those children in greatest need to take them off the pathway towards crime. We do know many social factors which are culprits in predisposing young children into a life of crime. And for every one social cause, I believe there's also a biological cause too. And we're finding out more about the biological side of the equation. Put them together, and I think in the future we'll know reasonably well which children are really at risk. Now, children, I think the great thing about kids is that they can change. So I worked for 4 years in prisons in England trying to change 30-year-old psychopaths, murderers, rapists, pedophiles. Guess what? You can't change them. You really can't change them.
I guess they don't want to change either, maybe.
Maybe they don't want to change. Maybe they don't believe they should change. Maybe they believe there's nothing wrong with them. That's one of the issues. There's a paper published just 2 years ago looking at all the randomized controlled trials on psychosocial interventions that we do in prison to see whether it reduces recidivism, meaning when they get released, if you've had the treatment program, are you less likely to commit crime? And it's really shocking because if you take out just the small scale studies and just go to the more reliable, larger sample size studies, there's no effect whatsoever of psychosocial interventions in reducing later crime. Why is that? I would say because you're ignoring the biological side of the equation. All of the programs are psychosocial interventions. We don't think of biological interventions to change crime. And I think we can. We can do that even in prisons.
Right.
Well, I was about to say, is it also because by the age of 30 plus, your brain is basically set, and then in terms of it's very few neuronal changes actually happen, like your amygdala is not going to grow more.
There is that, and that's why if we go to children and even adolescents, the brain is still growing there. So we've got a better chance of, I believe, changing the brain to change behavior. I'm not saying it's impossible to change in adulthood, but obviously it's going to be more difficult. So that gives a push towards screening and intervening earlier on in life. But we come back to the ethics of this. We'll always make mistakes. And if there's just one person who's wrongly cast as a criminal to be, and they're not a criminal to be, and then we put them into interventions to try and change their behavior, then we would sort of agree, well, that's a bad mistake to make. And we'll always make mistakes.
What would the interventions look like from a biological point of view?
So a very simple one, for example, is omega-3 supplementation. So to date, I've published 5 randomized controlled trials giving omega-3 supplementation to children, showing that it reduces aggressive impulsive behavior. So omega-3 is a long-chain fatty acid. It's critical for brain structure and function. It regulates neurotransmitter functioning. It regulates gene expression, sort of in your area. It enhances the functioning of the cell. About 30% of the cell membrane around the neuron is made up of omega-3. It's absolutely critical. Our bodies can't produce this. We can only get omega-3 from the environment. Biggest source of that is fish. So just before coming to New Zealand, I was touring the juvenile justice facilities in Thailand, and they're doing wonderful things for those kids in terms of training. But they also had this big board which showed all the meals that the kids got every day for a month: breakfast, lunch, dinner, for 31 days. But it's in Thai and I couldn't read it. So I asked my colleague, can you tell me how many times they get fish? Because fish has got omega-3 in. And the answer was none. And I asked why. And they said, it's too expensive. It's cost. So that gets me thinking of, well, what about in New Zealand? I mean, what's the diet like for offenders here? Are they getting a sufficient amount of omega-3? And the reason I'm raising this, raising it as a possible part, not a cure for crime, but a part aid, is that the last randomized controlled trial that I published was giving omega-3 supplementation to young offenders in prison in Singapore. And at the end of the treatment, those who got the intervention had a significant reduction in aggressive behavior in the prison. And that lasted for, a 6-month follow-up after the treatment had ended. Not just that, but I looked at recidivism rates 1, 2, and 3 years after those individuals were released. And those who went into the omega-3 group compared to the placebo group, placebo think they're getting the omega-3, but they're not. There's a 16.6% reduction in recidivism 3 years later. Now, that's not 100%. And because we had a modest sample size, that difference was not statistically significant. But compared to 2 control groups, the omega-3 group were lower by that amount. So what we want to do is do a much larger scale study with a bigger sample size, with a bigger dose of omega-3, and giving omega-3 boosters when they're released back into the community, to look to see whether omega-3 could be one ingredient of the recipe for curing crime, for stopping the rot, for changing things. And it sounds a bit fishy, doesn't it? You know, fish for felons. It sounds a little bit hokey. And there is a problem here, because I think when you get to talk about nutrition and behavior, at least among scientists, I think there's 2 groups. There's one group who are really adamant and fervent that nutrition is part of the solution. And there's, on the other side of things, there's another group of scientists who are extremely critical and skeptical about the idea that anything in nutrition can really change something as complex as criminal behavior. So I think even in the research field, I think there's a tension there between those extreme perspectives. But that is one example of an intervention which is very benign and has no side effects.
Yeah. That
could be used, that could be employed. At least I think it should be tried out. And I think New Zealand would be a good place to try this out.
Yeah. It makes me think of the cycle of poverty in New Zealand and child poverty, and children maybe having these nutritional deficiencies, and then they're, have worse outcomes. And like you say, it's just a little switch,
Well, and the other thing is that there are health benefits to omega-3 other than reducing impulsive aggressive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good for the cardiovascular system. That's been reasonably well documented scientifically, medically now. So I think it's maybe worth a try, something like that. But there are other things that can be done, I think. For example, we know from our longitudinal work in Mauritius that poor sleep early on in life is associated with a greater likelihood of committing crime as an adult. That's controlling for all social background factors. We know that prisoners in prison get less sleep in prison than on the outside. That actually, because of the stress and the tension. I mean, if you were living with murderers and rapists and psychopaths, how at ease would you be at night? No. So you sleep less well. There's a lot of noise going on as well. And we know that the lack of sleep is associated with increased irritability and impulsive aggression. Think about it yourself. If you get a bad night's sleep, next morning you're a bit more irritable, right? So it's not surprising. But are there things that we can do in prison to enhance prison? Maybe just a very simple sleep hygiene program, a very simple psychoeducational program to enhance sleep. And what about giving prisoners blindfold masks to shut out the light and earplugs to maybe dampen down the sound? I mean, I don't know if they ever get them. I know, for example, with those juvenile facilities in Thailand, at nighttime, they have the lights on all the time at night.
Oh, so they can keep an eye on them, is that
for security?
Yeah.
So we can understand it. Yeah, I mean, institutions need to have security, so we can understand the reason why. What I'm fascinated by is, could a simple intervention, a test of giving some kids blindfolds, earplugs, for example, so cheap, easy, simple to implement, and the other half just treatment as usual, they just stay as they are. And do we get a reduction in violence within the institution?
I wondered that would be interesting, because as you said, that you'd be so stressed in general, and then that's why you wouldn't be able to sleep if you had murderers, psychopaths around you. And then if you put earplugs on and blindfold on, you couldn't hear someone's going to attack you then. So.
Well, that could be true. If people can be pretty paranoid in a prison and they want to be alert. And actually, there's a lovely 2-minute video of an ex-con who's talking about, he has a podcast, I think, and he's answering people's questions. And one question he gets, what's it like in prison? And he's so funny and humorous about sleeping in prison, because this guy's really big guy. I mean, this guy's enormous, and he's scared about sleeping too much. He says, you don't want to sleep too well in prison anyway, because you want to be up, get your boots on and be ready to war if things begin to fire up in the prison at night.
Yeah.
So I think you're dead right. I think for many offenders, they wouldn't want to sleep too much. But can we do something about making prisons more secure? For people to be able to sleep, to reduce aggression and violence. Here's a counter perspective. Why be helping these prisoners who have harmed us so much, especially when there's kids in the community that are not getting, 3 square meals a day, don't have a roof over their head? People can say charity begins at home, not in prison. So that's a counterpoint that I think we have to consider as well.
Oh, but then I guess it comes back around. It keeps everyone else safe,
Right.
Yeah.
It could be, if we could reduce aggression within the prison, it would help the prison officers who have to deal with these individuals.
Yeah.
It would cut the cost of violence, because violence is costly. In terms of medical attention and so on. So it could be a win-win all around, but I'm not sure that we are motivated enough to help people who have hurt us. And I think even from an evolutionary standpoint, I think we are built genetically to cast aside those amongst us who have harmed us. Go back to early hominid days. If we'd had this bleeding heart approach to murderers or people who stole our food and whatever, well, we wouldn't be here today. We would have become extinct.
Yeah.
So I think I think we have this built into us to have this gut feeling of retribution, and I think it's going to be very hard to shake that. Can we overcome our evolutionary instincts in today's civilized world? I would hope we could. I think it's not impossible, but I think it's something that has to be recognized.
But that's where the charity starts at home comes in, where if you're taking care of people at homes, you could probably prevent offenders of
You're
tomorrow.
exactly right. Yes, if we start in the home helping those kids and parents who are really in need and, at risk for child abuse or for becoming a perpetrator of violence, I think that's the start. I think the best investment that society can possibly make in stopping future crime is investing in the early years of the child, investing at the social level, the psychological level, and the biological level.
What are some practical steps to that kind of support?
The first one I would think of is nutrition. That's one. We've talked about that. But let me tell you something that I've done in Mauritius, for example, that did make a difference. So from age 3 to 5 years, we gave children an environmental enrichment. Now, what's that? Well, every day, or 5 days a week, let me say, that they had better nutrition. They had cognitive stimulation. They had more physical exercise. And they had a nap after every lunch. You know about physical exercise. You know it results in neurogenesis, new brain cells growing. We know nutrition is critically important to the brain. We know that sleep, and if you lack sleep, you impair the functions of that prefrontal cortex and its ability to regulate and control the amygdala deeper in the brain. Right. So we did that for 2 years to one group of children, and they were randomized into that. The other group got just whatever was happening in Mauritius at that point in time, the same normal treatment. Nothing was changed. We then followed them up for 20 years. And we found that those who went into the enrichment showed a 34% reduction in criminal offending 20 years later. 20 years later. What's going on? There's a lot of things in that intervention, but one thing we do know, that intervention changed the brain because we followed up those children to age 11 and measured EEG, the electroencephalogram. We found that the children in the enrichment had more alert and aroused brain functioning compared to that control group. And we could put a number on it because comparing it to normative data, we found that the brains of the kids who had that early enrichment, their brains matured 1.1 years. So that 11-year-old brain was the brain of a child age 12.1 year. Compared to that control group. So I think we can change the brain in benign ways early on in life to change behavior and to change criminal behavior. We have the wherewithal, we have the knowledge. The question is, are we going to do it?
Yep.
We can. It'll cost, but the cost, it'll pay. The investment will pay enormously in the future by the reduction of victimization and the awful cost of crime in society.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the nutrition idea, and exercise and so on, because those are simple things which you do for other medical illnesses as well, like for early onset diabetes, for risk of heart disease, so on and so forth. You still take care of your nutrition, you exercise, you do all those things. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really change much in terms of an intervention per se.
No, it's just a question of, are we willing to change what we do based on the research? And I think that's difficult for scientists to really get the research out to policymakers to say, look, listen, learn. There are things we scientists are doing that could be applied in society. And maybe your podcast here might be a mechanism where the message gets out.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying.
Yeah. What would a great system look like for you? Like if you had to sort of make a stake in the ground?
It would be that investment in the early years of the child. We can raise taxes. Maybe there's other ways we can raise the money. I mean, nobody likes more taxes.
Yeah.
But we can put the money in there. I think one of the difficulties is we probably know we should eat more healthily, that omega-3 is good for you, that, yeah, we should get 8 hours sleep a night. And a power nap after lunch can be shown to, actually, is documented scientifically to be cognitively helpful to us. And that could help industry, it could help productivity throughout. There's more knock-on effects to not just reducing crime, but it's getting people to change.
Mm.
We all know how to lose weight. We just don't put edible things into our mouths. We know how to lose weight. Can we do it? We know that sleep is very important. We know exercise is important for all the health reasons that you've just mentioned. And yet, despite all that, we're still not doing it. So it goes beyond my expertise as a scientist, and it goes to those behavioral scientists who can try and work out how we can give people nudges into more healthier eating, into a more healthy lifestyle, whether it's cognitive stimulation and doing, well, we know, like, for example, older people, to stave off Alzheimer's, they do more crossword puzzles, things like that, stimulate the brain, use it or lose it. So some people know about this and some people implement little strategies. So is the approach to try and give little nudges to, what would it be like? If we were to believe this fishy story that omega-3 really is the golden bullet that can shoot down the crime figures in the future, would we increase omega-3 in school menus, for example? Surreptitiously slide in a bit of fish into the menu so that it's an epidemiological approach. We're not targeting any individual. And so we're not stigmatizing people with new programs, but we are slipping it in. I think some schools in some parts of the country realize that, 12, 13, teenagers need more sleep, and they need more sleep in the morning. So that's changing school hours from early start to a later start, because they know it's going to be beneficial. Could it be approaches like that? Because if we can change omega-3 intake for the whole population, if we can shift the distribution of intake a little bit, then the extreme on the bell curve can get reduced, potentially. And that could be the vicious thugs, murderers that we are having to deal with at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
That's really interesting.
Or far-fetched, depending on...
Yeah. I think some things can actually be done. For, like you said, the school food programs, things governments already do, or some governments already do food programs, so, or are trying to. Doing a bit more of that can help. Of course, a lot of countries, well, especially the more developed ones, education is free, so it's already provided for by the government. School menus are already provided by governments to most extents. So doing that is not very far-fetched.
No. Still difficult, and it's still money. And money doesn't talk, it swears. It shouts out loudly. And so people are always worried about, where the money in the is going in society. And it depends on your priorities. But for me, I think I've got to the point after 5 randomized controlled trials that I do believe there's something there. Something. It may not be massive, but it is something, and it's benign, and it's not too expensive.
But the funniest thing is, you said, was it 16%? Which you said roughly at the end? So if you look at 16% in 40 people is nothing. But when you go to about 1 billion people across the world, the number which you're covering at that point.
Yeah, it's even within the United States, for example, it's billions and billions of dollars that are saved by reducing violence. And a significant amount would be saved here in New Zealand too. So it could pay for itself. I think one of the problems is that within the political sphere, what's the term in New Zealand? Is it 4 years?
3 years.
3 years, right. So you've got a limited window. You want results in 3 years. We're talking about results 20 years later. And in the political sphere, there's just not the time horizon that's needed to argue for the cost effectiveness. because there'll be a cost to begin with, and in a 3-year term, you're not getting the payback.
Yeah.
Wow.
But aren't we all diminished by that short-sightedness?
Yes. So
Definitely.
you've heard it here. Next New Zealand election, the term should be 20 years. That's...
Well, China have a different perspective on things, don't they?
Yeah.
You know, with the third term that the premier is getting, all of a sudden.
That could be onto something.
Yeah, bring dictatorships back. Wow.
And we've got Putin's doing well on his term. He's stretched that out.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
What's it? Lukashenko, the other one? Since the 80s, isn't he? That's when he was elected?
Wow.
In Belarus, something like that.
I don't know, but
something like that.
But
wow.
Yeah, but I'm not saying if you go in that direction in terms of dictatorships at all.
No, but I think long-term planning is really important for these things. And I think that's one, and politics, as you said, is very short-sighted in a way because you need the changes immediately to get re-elected.
What you would hope is that all parties could agree on one thing. Crime is costly. They could search, independent scientific body to give recommendations for how we can change society, to change things in the long term. And there could be some bipartisan agreement to, go with this, even though it's going to be costly to begin with, even though it may take 20 years to pay back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, can I ask you now, what are you doing in New Zealand? Because we've spoken about your work in Mauritius, we've spoken about your work in the USA, we've spoken about your work in the UK. Now, you did mention you're working with Edwig Heisenbach, who was also on this podcast a while ago. And could you?
Well, I've been talking to, Ministry of Children, for example, about the work I do. I've been talking to the Department of Prisons also, and they're very interested in this. And in fact, I gave a seminar where I talked about a whole number of things. I even talked about something we've not talked about, and that's transcranial direct current stimulation, which is gobbledygook, but it's basically electrically stimulating the brain to change aggressive behavior. That's really going into the holy of holies and manipulating brain functioning directly through electricity, which sounds very Frankensteinish, doesn't it?
I was about to say, it sounds like shock therapy, which was given as
to
extreme
depressive patients. That's right, yes. Well, this is benign. Transcranial direct current stimulation is you're just placing electrodes here over the frontal cortex, the part of the brain that we believe needs upregulating, and you pass an electrical current through it for 20 minutes to sort of prime the prefrontal cortex to get it more positioned to be activated. Some people who play video games buy these kits to stimulate themselves to enhance their gaming. Yeah.
I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, you can buy them on Amazon. They're benign. To begin with, you get a little bit of a tingling sensation, but then that after 20, 30 seconds, that just goes. And the argument is, it's used in other conditions like anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions, or it's now being applied a bit more. We published a randomized controlled trial about 3 years ago showing that it reduces the intention to commit a criminal aggressive act. Now, that needs replication. It needs extension. This is just the very beginning, but it's cheap. It's easy to do. It's got no side effects. It's benign. It's not invasive. You're not doing surgery to anyone. And all you really need are 2 electrodes and a 7-volt battery, and that will do it.
Yeah. Wow. So this could be the future of preventing crime and...
Well, could it electrify our attempts to rehabilitate offenders? Well, I think that this didn't go down quite as well in the prison department as the idea of nutrition. So to come back to your question, they are interested in that. And I've been talking to University of Otago and University of Canterbury and connecting with colleagues there to see what we can do, because this is really just the beginning of me being here. And I'm excited to see what can be done. And whether I can do something to help what's going on here in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm. Wow, there's so much interesting stuff coming up for the future. I'm so curious to see how it will change in terms of next 10, 20 years.
Well, I'd like to see a change. I think we'd all like to see a change in reducing crime. But there is a skepticism about biological research. And I understand it because, biological research has been misused in the past, historically. In the United States, we carried out eugenics. We sterilized people with low IQs under the argument that there's a genetic basis to IQ. So why not just sterilize all those with lower IQ? That will raise the IQ in the whole population. So people will ask, how do we know that the bad old days of eugenics are over? How do we know that this type of research won't be misused by the government? How do we know that the government won't start brain scanning everyone and rounding up those amongst us who have a brain scan like a serial killer? And I'm concerned about that because my brain scan looks very similar to a serial killer's, to Randy Kraft's, for example.
Yep.
So I'm the first one who wouldn't want brain imaging to be used to screen and lock up those amongst us who seem to have the risk factors for crime. Did you see that movie called Minority Report? It's a long time ago now. It's Tom Cruise.
No,
It's science fiction, but it's all about how they're able to stop crime before it starts.
Yeah.
And what they do with a person is they lock them up, basically, and freeze them for a good number of years to take them out of circulation there. So I think knowledge it's a double-edged sword. The more we learn about the causes of crime and the more we learn about who amongst us have the risk factors for becoming a criminal offender, the more concern we will have about those in power using this knowledge to nefarious ends, to lock up innocent people like me before, they've committed a crime. I mean, if I was going to be locked up, at least give me a chance to murder some of my critics before you
Before you could. Yeah.
I don't want to be locked up for nothing.
Yeah. Wow, it's a lot of really interesting philosophical discussions.
Dilemmas.
Yeah.
Well,
they go beyond like psychology.
It does go beyond psychology. And I think it's good for us to talk about it because I want to raise the scarier sides of these things because I think it's important to look at things from all sides and to recognize that although as scientists we are benign, we want, like everyone else, a reduction in crime and violence in society. But we're also aware that research can be misused. By the way, social science research can also be misused as well. So it's not just an argument that applies to biological research. I mean, it applies to all areas of research. They can be misused, as we know. So we need due care and caution, and we do need open discussion. I think that's important, the open discussion about where we are and where we're headed.
Yep. Amazing. Cool. How are we doing for time? I think we're
an hour 10 in, so
amazing. Should we wrap it up there?
should we wrap it there? I think that's a good place to
Awesome.
wrap
Yeah.
up.
Cool. Do you have the questions?
Do you just remember a few? We can just ask them. I didn't bring any.
Yeah, we have quick fire questions at the end. Let's try to remember what they are.
So the way
Are these quick fire and I quick answer? Or?
Yeah, it's quick
Yeah.
fire, quick answer. Nothing to necessarily do with your work.
Yeah.
So are you ready?
Yep.
Summer or winter? That's not very quick fire here.
Summer?
Movies or TV shows?
Movies.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
All right, I can ask you this because we spoke about nutrition. What is your least favorite fruit or vegetable?
Oh, I really... there's quite a number I really don't like, but spinach.
Oh,
I've always had a problem with spinach.
Follow-up question. Are there any studies to show iron deficiency and criminal behavior?
I think there is some research on that. There is some research on that somewhere. There's not a lot, though. But some suggesting that iron deficiency could play a role.
Mm. I've remembered one. What's your least favourite kind of music?
That's really tough because I like all sorts of music. I have to pass on that one.
You listen to everything and anything.
Yeah, pretty well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll have an open mind to it.
Yeah.
If you were to be an animal, what animal would it be?
A monkey.
Next one is there a saying which you think, which other people say, but you think is complete bullshit?
Oh, well, there is a saying I don't like, and that is, it is what it is. I find that so empty. I think it's so pointless. I mean, I think it's uttered by people who don't know what to say and really have a very limited vocabulary. I'm being very snobbish here. I'm being very snobbish, but it is what it is. Come on, that conveys no information. Or, this happens a lot in America. People saying, it's like, what I mean, like he was like. And they use this word like as a filler all the time.
Mm.
And that irritates me.
I think it's a young person thing.
Yeah, so young people do it a lot. And
I did New Zealand too, right?
Yeah, we do it a lot.
It's like the thing to do in New Zealand. Yeah.
Oh, really? Not so much elsewhere, like in the UK, or?
No, I was making that up. I don't really know. I haven't heard. I just know in the United States it's used a lot. Because you're dead right, especially by students. I don't know why.
Is it just hearing it from other people and then you pick it up and?
Well, this is an interesting linguistics question about, why do some things catch on? I had wondered whether it's giving a person a bit of time to think. When I say, well, it was like, oh, well, and then so that is that its function to sort of give a person a bit of a breather in the conversation?
Because I heard that we ask, hi, how are you? So we can think of the next thing when we first see someone, so we can think of the next thing to say, which is, how's your thing been going?
That could be, that could be a similar thing, like, how are you? Because nobody really says, I've got this really bad headache and I didn't sleep well last night. And they don't go on for half an hour telling you how they are.
Yeah, it's an automatic sort of filler.
Yeah, so it could be a bit like that. But I wonder it could be research, because you wonder whether people pause after they say like, and if there's a significant also pause, or whether they're just throwing in like and they're just moving on. But this in the United States, I think it's a pause.
Kind of like how people say or
like yeah.
Or is it so people don't have to say definitive statements? You're like, it's kind of like.
Maybe it's conveying they're not really quite sure about what they're just about to say.
Possibly.
So it's like a sort of caveat almost, perhaps. But I'm not a linguistic, but somebody probably knows the answer to this question.
Cool. We will get a linguistic researcher on and ask them this very question.
Yes.
All right. If you had a superpower, what would it be?
Curing crime.
Oh.
All right. The last two questions. First, if you were not doing this, if you were not a criminal psychologist, what would you be doing?
Painter.
Like Van Gogh stuff, or
would I love?
Or just regular.
Well, yeah, but I can't paint, and I've never painted. So, but I'd like to paint. I envy people who can paint.
Yeah, where do you think that interest stems from?
It's come just recently from. I'll have to turn my phone on.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
Well, something I saw on one of the, when you're going down into the town, there's all these steps. So I saw this cat. So I took this.
I know exactly which cat you're talking about.
Do?
The one with the massive black and white cat.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about the cat. I just saw it and took a picture, but
it's just always there next to its painting.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
So the cat's always been there, and then an artist has decided to paint the cat. And it is
Ooh.
It's spooky to see it the first time, though. Like, there's a painting and there's the cat.
Yeah, so, so it's like posing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in the same way there, yeah.
Yep.
So I don't know. I think that sort of stimulated my idea about painting. And I was looking at the apartment I'm in, the flat, and looking at the paintings there, and I think they're really awful. And I sent one home saying, look, I think I could do something as good as this.
Yeah.
More modern art. So, yeah, because, I mean, I can't paint people or anything. I just throw a lot of paint onto something and have fun.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people think they have to be good at something to continue to do it or, it's just a hobby. So,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anyway, that was that fast response to that question.
Yes.
Painting. I wasn't thinking, though.
I actually have the exact same picture which you do.
Wow.
And I am looking it up
Really?
in my phone. I cannot find it.
Well, I thought I was unique. And the cat's there and it's like, it's looking exactly like it looks in the mural.
Mm.
Maybe I'll look it up and show it to you afterwards.
I wonder what's led that cat to sit there.
Yeah.
I wonder how old it is.
For all the people who are wondering about this entire conversation, there's on Wellington, like just by the university, there's a set of steps and there is a cat, black and white cat there, and someone has done a mural of the cat, and it often poses in the exact same way as
same profile.
Yeah, it's incredible. Anyway,
we can put the picture up on Instagram.
Yeah,
so
we should put the picture up on Instagram. Yeah. I would love to credit the artist as well, but I have no clue who it is.
No.
All right. Are you much of a drinker, or did you used to be?
I'll have a drop.
Yeah, that's great to know. So, who is most likely to win a drinking competition, and why is it a forensic psychologist?
Oh, well, I wouldn't win for sure. No, I couldn't possibly win a drinking contest. So, and I don't think forensic psychologists have got any advantage in drinking. I don't get that question.
Well, just to see how people answer those things.
Okay.
But,
yeah.
All right.
Some people take it quite seriously, like, it's this kind of research or my kind of research.
Oh.
Yeah. And lastly, if you had any advice to give to listeners, what would it be?
Eat your fish. It's just like your grandmother said, fish food is brain food. And, there's an argument that it can also enhance cognitive functioning. I mean, and these effects are never big, but it could help mood. It can help depression, omega-3. And, some people claim it can help sleep. I mean, there's a lot of claims out. We have to be a bit skeptical. But if there's one thing to do for your cardiovascular system and to prime it up, omega-3. Like more fish and chips. I'm not sure about the chips. I'm not sure about the batter. That's probably not a good recommendation. But try and think about at least having one portion of fish a week for a balanced diet. It's going to have other health benefits too, especially if you're a pregnant mum.
Yeah. And what about vegetarian, vegan options in terms of omega-3?
Oh, well, you mean... Oh, well, I suppose the Mediterranean diet has also been looked at, and kids eating a Mediterranean diet are less likely to have what's called externalizing behavior, which means impulsive aggressive behavior. There's some research on that. So, yeah, the Mediterranean diet, which is what you were talking about, really. More fruit, more veg, less of the red, dark meat. But it's difficult, because I was... The other week I was over in Kentucky Fried Chicken, and despite the work I do, I was really enjoying the KFC. So, it's difficult. It is so hard. But slipping in a bit of extra fish, slipping in slippery fish every week,
Great.
I think that can be helpful.
Amazing. That's great advice. Awesome.
That's the one thing I'd like to leave people with.
Great. Amazing. Thank you for chatting to us today, Adrian.
Not at all. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. It was great. Thanks for everyone listening. And until next time, eat some fish. Thanks.
Amazing.